Welcome back, my dear followers. This is a new episode of the History of the American Mafia, a podcast brought to you by Fabio Fabiano and translated and read by Grace Carlisi. I do hope you enjoy this new episode. This is part 2 of a 3-part series on Meyer Lansky. In 1946, Lansky attended a secret meeting in Havana, Cuba, to discuss Siegel's management of the Flamingo Hotel. Siegel, well behind schedule, and created huge losses for the Mafia investors. While other leaders wanted to kill Siegel, Lansky begged them to give his friend a second chance. Despite this new opportunity, Siegel continued to create liabilities at the Flamingo. A second meeting was therefore organized. Fortunately, this meeting took place while the casino had started to make a slight profit. Once again, Lansky, with Luciano's support, convinced the other investors to give Siegel more time. However, when the hotel began losing profits once again, the investors had had enough and had decided to eliminate Siegel. On June the 20th, 1947, Siegel was shot and killed in Beverly Hills, California. 20 minutes after Siegel's murder, Lansky's associates, including Gus Greenbaum and Mo Sedway, entered the Flamingo and took control of the hotel. According to the FBI, Lansky maintained a substantial financial interest in the Flamingo for the following 20 years. He also stated in several interviews given many years later that if it had been up to him, Ben Siegel would still be alive today. Siegel's death marked a transition in the control of the gambling activities in Las Vegas from the 5 New York Mafia families to those in Chicago, also known as the Chicago Outfits. Although with a smaller role than in previous years, Lansky is believed to have continued to manage the Las Vegas gambling halls, helping Chicago boss Tony Accardo with the management of the casinos. His extravagant lifestyle obviously had a reflection on his private life, and a divorce in 1947 brought to a second marriage with Thelma Schwartz in 1948. At the conclusion of World War II, Lucky Luciano was paroled from prison on the condition that he was to return to Italy permanently. However, Luciano secretly moved to Cuba, where he worked to regain control of the Mafia operations. Luciano also managed a number of casinos in Cuba with the approval of the dictator Fulgencio Batista, although the US government was successful in pressurizing Batista's regime into deporting Luciano. Meanwhile, a solid friendship and business relationship was born between Batista and Lansky that lasted for a decade. During a stay at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York in the late 1940s, it was agreed that in exchange for a payoff, Batista would offer Lansky and the Mafia control of the country's casinos and racetracks. Batista would open Havana to a large-scale gambling, and his government would support any hotel investment above $1 million, including licensing casinos. Lansky, at that point, was at the center of Cuba's gambling operations. He obtained enough collateral to invite his Mafia associates to hold a summit in Havana. The Havana Conference was held on December the 22nd, 1946, at a Hotel Nacional. Since the Chicago meeting in 1932, this was the first large-scale meeting of Mafia American crime leaders. Mafia representatives from all over the country were present. Joe Adonis, Albert Anastasia, Frank Costello, Joe Bonanno, Vito Genovese, Thomas Lucchese came from New York. From New Orleans, Santos Trafficante Jr. and Carlos Marcello. From Buffalo, Stefano Magadino, Bonanno's cousin. From Chicago, Accardo and the Fischetti brothers, Charlie and Rocco. Representing the Jewish gangs, Lansky, Dalit, and Dandy Phil Castile from Florida. The first to arrive was Luciano, who, despite being deported to Italy, managed to travel to Havana with a false passport. Lansky proposed investing a considerable sum of money in the new gambling business in Havana. According to Lucky Luciano, who was the only participant who ever recounted the events in detail, he himself was appointed mafia boss to run things from Cuba until he was able to find a legitimate way to return to the United States. As for the majority of these large conferences, entertainment was provided. Amongst some of those big names, there was Frank Sinatra, who flew to Cuba with his friends, the Fischetti brothers. In 1952, Lansky offered then-President Carlos Brios Ocarras a $250,000 payoff to resign, allowing Batista to return to power. Once Batista regained control of the government in a military coup in March 1952, one of his first priorities was to take care of the gambling activities. Batista offered Lansky an annual salary of $25,000 as shadow gambling minister. By 1955, it changed the gambling laws once again, granting a license to build casinos to anyone who invested $1 million in a hotel or $200,000 in a dance club. Unlike the process for acquiring gaming licenses in Las Vegas, this provision exempted members from criminal background checks. As long as they made the necessary investment, they received matching public funds for construction, a 10-year tax exemption, and the importation of equipment and furnishing was totally duty-free. The government would get $250,000 for the license, plus a percentage of the profits for each casino. The 10,000 Cuban slot machines, even those that gave out small prizes to children at county fairs, were to be controlled by Batista's brother-in-law, Roberto Fernandez y Miranda, brother of his wife, Marta Fernandez Miranda de Batista. Fernandez, general of the Cuban Army and government sports director, also received the revenue from Havana's parking meters. Import duties on hotel construction materials were eliminated. Cuban contractors made windfalls by importing far more than they needed and selling the excess to others at huge profits. It was said that in addition to the $250,000 to get a license, more was sometimes needed under the table. Periodic payments were requested and received by corrupt politicians. Lansky began renovating the Cabaret Montmartre, which soon became the hit spot of Havana. He also opened a Hotel Nacional casino, counting on Batista's support to overcome objections from other American expatriates, including Ernest Hemingway. Once all the new hotels, nightclubs and casinos were built, Batista wasted no time in collecting his share of the profits. At night, the employees, on behalf of his wife Marta, collected 10% of the profits in Traficante's interest. The Sanssouci Cabaret and casinos of the Sofia Biltmore, the Commodore, the Deveux, and the Capri hotels. Batista's earnings from Lansky's casinos, his prized Habana Riviera, the Nacional and Montmartre, and others, were said to be at 30%. What exactly Batista and his accomplices actually received in total in terms of bribes, payments and speculation has never been certified. The slot machines alone brought a profit of about $1 million to the men of the dictatorship. The Cuban Revolution in 1959 and the rise of Fidel Castro changed the scene for mafia investments in Cuba. On New Year's Eve, 1958, as Batista prepared to flee to the Dominican Republic and later to Spain, where he died in exile in 1973, Lansky was celebrating his earning $3 million during his first year in business in one of his 440 rooms of the $8 million building on the Havana Riviera. Many of the casinos, including Lansky's, were looted and destroyed that night. On January the 8th, 1959, Castro marched into Havana and seized power, establishing a command post in the Hilton Hotel. Lansky fled the day before for the Bahamas and other Caribbean destinations. The new Cuban president, Manuel Trujillo, closed the casinos. In October 1960, Castro nationalized the island's hotel casinos and outlawed gambling. This action substantially wiped out Lansky's assets, base, and revenue streams. He lost about $7 million, the equivalent of $47.9 million of today. With the further crackdown on Miami's casinos, Lansky's income then depended on the Las Vegas gambling halls.